For the past few weeks, we have investigated the works of Dr. Carl Jung, a leading psychologist that a lot of people look up to for knowledge about how the mind works in this society that a lot of people are feeling confused, anxious, depressed about, and we need to find the solution. Okay, and before I do that, I want to just read two quotes from other individuals, some that you may have not heard of, like Aidan Ballou, a 19th century abolitionist. He says, "The heart is right, though the head might err." And what he means by that is that our heart, what we know to be true deep down inside, we actually ignore through our mind. The mind is actually causing errors. Even though we're thinking and we're all logical beings, we actually get in our own way of what we know to be true. This is something to bear in mind because this is an individual who helped end chattel slavery in the 1800s. Now, there's another quote from Paradigms, The Business of Discovering the Future by Joel Arthur Barker, and he says, "You can and should shape your own future, because if you don't, someone else surely will." A common theme throughout these weeks that we have discovered among Dr. Carl Jung's work is the emphasis on the individual, and this is very empowering. This can help an individual within their own life. So not just on a collective scale of looking at society, but within your own individual life. So let us continue our exploration of Dr. Carl Jung's insights into the origins of the state, the government, and its effects on myriad aspects of society, as we have found in his last great work, The Undiscovered Self. And these impacts, as we have discussed, have been monumental. So last article we explored how the growing power of the state leads to the destruction of the individual, and how the loss of individualism and growth of collectivism leads to mass slaughter. So let us continue to build on these observations. Quote, "Under these circumstances, it is small wonder that individual judgment grows increasingly uncertain of itself, and that responsibility is collectivized as much as possible, i.e., is shuffled off by the individual and delegated to a corporate body. In this way, the individual becomes more and more a function of society, which in its turn usurps the function of the real-life carrier, whereas, in actual fact, society is nothing more than an abstract idea like the state. Both are hypostatized, that is, have become autonomous. The state, in particular, is turned into a quasi-animate personality from whom everything is expected. In reality, it is only a camouflage for those individuals who know how to manipulate it. Thus, the constitutional state drifts into the situation of a primitive form of society, namely the communism of a primitive tribe where everybody is subject to the autocratic rule of a chief or an oligarchy." Okay, so that was a statement by Dr. Carl Jung. You can find that on page 11 of The Undiscovered Self. So one of the big benefits people believe that they can gain from the state is that it allows them to avoid responsibility for their own lives. People delegate their thinking and decision-making to the state in exchange for obedience, as long as it protects them and provides for them. Even when it fails to live up to these premises, and it never does live up to them, the mere fact that it promises to do so is most often enough for people. In delegating away their liberty, they are essentially surrendering their individuality and the responsibility it replaces upon them to the corporate identity of the state. The state then begins to act as if it were the person or persons it claims to represent, justifying all its actions in their name and by their authority. As this process occurs, its power grows, and as its power grows, the more those at the top claim to represent the nation itself, and the more the individuals in society allow themselves to be submerged into the collective, the Volk, the people, the nation. And so pieces of land go from property to the homeland, the fatherlands, and the motherland, while the government which run them becomes the voice of the parental state which oversees sees the masses as if they were children, incapable of survival without those in power to direct them in the same way babes would starve without the mother's treat, or wander into traffic and die without father's hand to guide and discipline them. You can even think of it like this. You have two sides that people are often voting for in politics. One is a father-like figure that promises to just protect, and the other one's a mother-like figure that wants to nurture and provide for their children. But both are supposed to be united, but instead people's own projections come to the surface and people vote for what they want in society through this mother or father-like figure that they don't have within their own personal life. Okay, so that's just a side note that I wanted to add in because it's just an interesting little thought experiment. But as Dr. Carl Jung says, no matter what state you have, you eventually end up in the authoritarian state, ruled by either oligarchs or an autocrat. Or, as the American religious leader Joseph Smith put it, quote, "We have learned by sad experience that it is the nature and disposition of almost all men, as soon as they get a little authority, as they suppose, they will immediately begin to exercise unrighteous domain." End quote. So Dr. Jung notes that for all the ink we spill and words we waste talking about them, concepts such as society and the state, they're actually just fictions, and society doesn't exist. Groups don't think. Groups don't have a voice. Groups don't act. An individual thinks, an individual speaks, an individual acts. That is all there is, and so society is a fiction that can be expanded upon or shrunk at will according to those doing the speaking, because it has no definitive meaning and therefore no existence at all. It is whatever you say it is, and having no definition, no parts, no personality, no passions, no mind, no will, no ability to act, it is nothing. Okay, so likewise, the state, it only exists because we buy into its fiction. If we disavowed it and became voluntarists, then the state would simply cease to exist, left behind in the dustbin of history along with such ideas as feudalism and Marxism, or even burning witches. I mean, gosh, all the things that we thought were true, these are superstitions we call them. They turn out, well, we were quite silly. Why did we do that? Why did we cause all this suffering for some madness? We look back in history and we see many examples of this, okay? We believe in the state, and that is a result of the intense indoctrination within it that we are subjected to from childhood, not because it objectively exists. People objectively exist. Human beings objectively exist. And as Bastiat perfectly said, the state is the great fiction by which everyone endeavors to live at the expense of everyone else. All forms of the state, including monarchy, eventually degrade into authoritarianism. How you organize your government and what you put into your written constitution might slow the process down or speed it up, but the outcome is inevitable. So this is why voluntarism is the solution. The only way to form governments that don't descend into autocracy, oligarchy, and tyranny is to make them voluntary. When the government has no power to compel obedience or any power at all, then it cannot warp, twist, and transform into totalitarianism. Voluntarism prevents tyranny and maximizes liberty, prosperity, and human equality by recognizing the inherent and inalienable rights of each and every person. It does not deal in collectives, but individuals. Individualism is the foundation of voluntarist interaction. And if we are to embrace voluntarism, the idea that all interactions should be voluntary, a voluntary free world essentially, all forms of governments, quote unquote, are voluntary and are various as there are individuals. Thus, there is no centralized government which collectivizes society or political parties which we are to collectivize into. By refusing to lay down the foundation upon which the edifice of totalitarianism is built, the state and its doctrines, we often call that statism, you prevent the state and its inevitable slavery and totalitarianism from coming into existence in the very first place. And if you truly wish to maintain the liberty of the individual and maximize the possibility of people to enjoy their liberty, maintain their safety, and pursue happiness, then you must nullify the state itself. You must abandon its false doctrines and leave its churches. It operates as a religion. You have these people to look up to, and you have to pray and hope that new laws are passed in your favor. You have this authority in man, but not in God, not in nature, not in truth, but in man as the deliverer of the truth. Okay? And so you really have no choice but to obey them, because if you don't, violence will be done upon you. That's not voluntary. Okay, so you have to be able to abandon the idea, the belief that we need violence, that violence is necessary for society to work, and rather embrace the idea that peace and love and voluntary interaction should be our main mode of operation, rather than violence. Okay, so only when we have forsaken the state completely and thereby torn it apart root and branch can liberty prosper and society have lasting peace. In political terms, voluntarism is not just the best way forward, it is the only way forward. Okay, and so we mean that, when I say we, I mean anyone who considers himself a voluntarist. This term is becoming quite more popular nowadays, but I don't even like to label myself as that, because if we're simply realizing our individual nature and us as human beings, we don't even need to say I'm a voluntarist, I'm just a human being. But if you had to have a political position, you can say, hey, I'm a voluntarist. You may even say I'm an abolitionist, meaning you want to abolish the state. And it just so happens a lot of the 19th century abolitionists were also anarchists, people who are usually said to be against the state. But the word anarchy, as we have discussed in previous videos and many of our articles you can find on theliberator.us, just means anarchon, no rulers in Greek. A lot of people don't know this, but even if you look at the word monarchy, it means one ruler, mono-archon, one ruler. So no rulers. It doesn't mean there's no rules. It doesn't mean people don't have leaders that they follow and they voluntarily emulate their actions. It doesn't mean that people don't have rules for their own business, for their own household, for their own property. But it does mean that you don't transgress upon others, that you don't commit violence upon them, that you don't hurt them, that you don't create a victim, that you don't violate the golden rule, that you don't break basic morality. And morality is not taught when legality is taught. We have to have these authorities do it for us, but are we all not to enforce morality? Are we all not to be moral peoples and always do what is right and find solutions to what's going on in the world? Why do we put it in select few people's hands? And why do we choose to play sports games and theater games of picking a side and picking a color and a team and voting them on to try to change the world? Why not educate people and share an idea, share a product, and see how it goes about in the world? And if it's actually good, people will follow it willingly, voluntarily, without the need of violence. You ever think about that? All the worries about defense, all the worries about this and that, and you can go on all day worrying about stuff. But would you rather have a centralized solution that says you have no choice but to follow this, or many solutions where they're all competing in the sense of saying, well, which one is the best? Which one can we choose for ourselves? Which one allows humans to express their creativity and be who they want to be for themselves? I mean, that is the human destiny, is it not? Freedom and abundance and happiness and being able to have a choice when it comes to medicine, when it comes to anything in life. That is the world I want to create. And it's simple because we do it every day. You know, we make our own choices, but the restrictions we find ourselves in this current day and age are often due to these collectivized systems that we have created for ourselves. And Dr. Carl Jung has basically brought it all together through his works, as we have discussed, and that's not even a lot of his work. We really only discussed a small portion of his work through this series. If you want to see the whole series, I recommend going to theliberator.us/psychology, theliberator.us/psychology. And there you can also see we have psychology experiments, which you probably never really heard of, but they're very powerful for what's going on in today's world. So always think about what's going on. Are people buying into a fiction that they call society or the state that Dr. Jung is warning us about? And how do we get out of that? Perhaps it's about individual change. Perhaps it's about creating better systems. Perhaps it's about approaching with love. We talked about non-resistance and non-violence and Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. and how that can be very powerful. We've talked about food forests and how you can bring people to an abundance of food in your own backyard and how that can change minds almost instantly. This is the change that we need. It's not in politics, it's in real grassroots change right now at your own home, with your own neighbors, with your own community. And I read a lot of this material from William H. Douglas, so go to his website, thelatterdayLiberator.com. He has a lot of great articles, really in detail, with a lot of sources. I really highly recommend checking out his content, especially if you come from a more spiritual perspective. But again, you don't have to. We all come from different backgrounds, but we all care about each other and we care about freedom. Much love, everybody. Thank you very much for watching. So if you want to send us your article, I'll turn it into a video for you. This is Corey Edin Angelot. Go to theliberator.us. That's theliberator.us.